A modest woman walks into an elite restaurant, hoping to surprise her husband, but is thrown out for looking too ordinary. What the staff doesn't know, her husband is the billionaire who owns the Porsche pulling up outside. A moment of judgment is about to unravel everything. If you feel drawn in, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow we have a story that will leave you speechless. The soft amber glow of downtown Boston's evening lights dance along the windows of boutique shops and polished cars, but Hannah Parker barely noticed. Her steps were quiet, measured, not with hesitation, but with purpose. Clay still clung faintly beneath her fingernails, a whisper of the pottery class she'd just finished. In her hands, art was not performance, but healing. She didn't dress to be seen. She dressed and moved freely to live. A beige cardigan, sensible flats, and jeans flecked with earth. Nothing remarkable, nothing intimidating. And yet, she carried herself like someone who knew her worth without needing to announce it. Tonight wasn't meant to be grand. It was just a simple errand, securing a table for next week's anniversary dinner. 14 years with Michael. 14 years since their first date, which had taken place right here, at the Crystal Palace. Back then, the restaurant had been ambitious but approachable. Now, it shimmered with opulence, a temple of velvet and glass, hosting Boston's elite like a velvet rope dream. Hannah paused before its entrance, watching guests step out of sleek black cars, draped in elegance. Through the crystal windows, chandeliers bloomed like golden stars. Her reflection caught in the glass door, hair tied in a loose bun, no makeup, smile faint but real. Not someone who belonged, at least not to them. She stepped inside. The air changed. Softer, colder. The maitre d's tailored black suit fit like armor. Her smile was cordial, but her gaze flicked from Hannah's clay-smeared jeans to her unfashionable shoes and stalled. "Good evening," Hannah offered warmly, unaware that the first judgment had already been made. "I'm afraid we're fully booked," came the reply, smooth as marble. And just like that, the surprise turned into something else, a quiet test of dignity in the face of curated cruelty. The lobby of the Crystal Palace shimmered like a snow globe of privilege, chandeliers sparkling, soft violin music curling through the air like expensive perfume. Hannah stepped in, still smelling faintly of clay and lavender soap, her fingers rough with traces of pottery. Her cardigan was warm, her shoes soft-soled and quiet. She smiled gently at the hostess, unaware that her welcome had already expired the moment she crossed the marble floor. "Good evening," she said, voice wrapped in kindness. "I'd like to make a reservation for next Friday, our anniversary." Victoria, the hostess, glanced up from her podium. Her expression was smooth as porcelain, practiced, unreadable. Her eyes swept over Hannah like a scanner. Beige sweater, no jewelry, hands that looked more like they worked and waved. "I'm afraid we're fully booked for the next 3 months," she replied, tone velvet-edged and steel. "Oh," Hannah said, still smiling. "I understand it's a popular place. This restaurant means a lot to us. It's where my husband and I had our first date." Her voice carried warmth, not desperation. But the warmth bounced off polished marble and landed nowhere. Behind her, a tall man in a designer suit swept in like wind through a crack in a door. Richard Hammond. Hannah recognized him from a local magazine, the kind of man who believed his watch made him important. He didn't glance at her. "Victoria, my usual table is unacceptable," he said, already annoyed. "And where's the 82 Bordeaux I asked for?" "Right away, Mr. Hammond," Victoria cooed, straightening like a dancer on cue. It was then he noticed Hannah, standing there, small and composed. "I thought this place had standards," he muttered loudly enough for Crystal to catch the vibration. "Since when do we let anyone just walking off the street?" The word struck like frost. Hannah didn't flinch. "Not yet. I'm just trying to make a reservation," she said gently. But Victoria's smile had changed. It no longer reached her eyes. "We cater to a certain clientele, madam," she said, with a tone that folded politeness into a blade. "Of course," Hannah nodded. "I'm happy to leave a deposit." "It's not about money," Victoria replied quickly. "It's about expectations." That word, expectations, hung in the air like the scent of scorched silk. Hannah heard it echo through every room she'd ever entered where people assumed she didn't belong. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. More guests were watching now. A ripple of amusement passed through a nearby table. Hannah turned to leave, quietly, gracefully, but Hammond wasn't done. He raised his voice, addressing no one and everyone. Some people just don't understand their place. That's when Elaine appeared, the manager, with a face like a courtroom verdict. "Is there a problem here?" she asked. Before Hannah could respond, Victoria said sweetly, "This woman was just leaving." Hannah turned, her voice a low hum of resolve. "Actually, I was trying to make a reservation for our anniversary." Elaine didn't flinch. "Ma'am, you're disturbing our guests." Disturbing. The word landed harder than she expected. Her eyes flicked around the room. Some patrons were embarrassed, others indifferent. No one stood. "I'm sorry," Hannah said, still composed. "I don't understand how asking for a table next week constitutes a disturbance." "You don't belong here," Hammond muttered, as if the universe had elected him spokesman. Elaine's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, I must ask you to leave, or I'll have you escorted out." A silence bloomed, rich and thick. For a moment, Hannah considered saying his name. "My husband is Michael Parker." But something in her rebelled. If they couldn't treat her with dignity before knowing who she was, they didn't deserve to know who she was at all. She stood tall, heartbreak quietly blooming beneath her ribs. "I see," she said, her voice steady. "You've made yourselves clear." Elaine snapped her fingers, and a young man in a suit, Thomas, stepped forward hesitantly. "Please escort this woman out." Thomas looked pained. "Ma'am, if you'll follow me," she walked with him. Head high, shoulders squared, dignity wrapped around her like a second cardigan, warmer than wool, more honest than their chandeliers. Behind her, Hammond's laugh followed like a mosquito. "Some people are just too poor to stay," he said, grinning. She didn't turn back, didn't cry. The shame they hoped to sow never took root, because she carried something they would never understand, unshakable self-respect. Outside, the night air tasted like metal. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. The screen glowed in her palm. One number, one name. She hesitated, then pressed call, not because she needed rescuing, but because it was time for the truth to arrive. The evening air was heavy with the scent of roasted rosemary and fine wine, as the Crystal Palace buzzed with its usual blend of opulence and exclusion. Behind the tall glass windows, the chandeliers shimmered like frozen galaxies. And just outside, Hannah stood like a note gone unheard, dignified but dismissed, her breath visible in the growing chill. Then came the low purr of power. A sleek, black Porsche 911 slid silently around the corner, its polished body mirroring the golden lights of the restaurant it now idled in front of. The car didn't just arrive, it pronounced itself, a symbol of precision, elegance, and force restrained. Michael Parker stepped out. His tuxedo was perfectly tailored, but it wasn't what caught attention. It was the stillness in his expression, the kind that demanded rooms hush without ever raising a voice. He scanned the entrance and found her, Hannah, his wife, standing in the shadows with her arms crossed not in anger, but in resolve. "Hannah?" he asked gently, already sensing something was wrong. Inside the Crystal Palace, the maitre d' Victoria straightened at the sight of him, her trained smile flickering with recognition before settling back into place. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Crystal Palace. Do you have a reservation?" Michael didn't blink. "I'm meeting my wife." A beat. "Of course, sir. May I have a name?" Michael Parker. The air in the lobby shifted. Even the champagne flutes seemed to still. Victoria's voice dropped half a pitch. "Mr. Parker, I don't believe we have a reservation under your name tonight." That's because she came earlier, to make one, for our anniversary next week. A pause. Calculations behind her eyes. "She may have been here," Victoria conceded. "Could you describe her?" Michael turned, gesturing to Hannah, behind the glass. Blonde hair, beige cardigan, beautiful, intelligent. The woman who has stood by me for 14 years through every product launch, every sleepless night, every risk. The woman who helped build everything I have. Victoria's face drained of color. Inside the dining room, Richard Hammond stopped swirling his wine. Patrons had begun to notice something shifting. Power, once so comfortably in their corner, was now migrating toward the entrance. Michael opened the door to Hannah and extended his hand. "Everything all right?" "Not exactly," she said, stepping beside him. Her voice was calm. Her silence before now had only given it more weight. Elaine, the manager, appeared like a chess piece moved too late. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her tone still clipped, but softened by uncertainty. "I understand my wife was asked to leave," Michael said, voice smooth as glass. Elaine hesitated. "Sir, we have certain standards." "What standards," he interrupted softly, "would prevent a woman like her from simply making a reservation?" The restaurant dimmed in silence, not because the lights had changed, but because the attention of every guest had been seized. Victoria was flipping through reservation cards, as if a missing piece of paper could erase what had been done. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding," Elaine offered. "No," Hannah interjected. "You were very clear about your standards and how I didn't meet them." Michael turned to her, then back to Elaine. "This establishment prides itself on excellence. And yet tonight, it chose to humiliate someone based solely on appearance." Richard Hammond scoffed from his table, rising with theatrical indignation. The woman was clearly underdressed. Rules exist for a reason. Michael faced him with deliberate calm. "And you are—" "Hammond, Richard Hammond. I'm something of a regular." Michael's gaze didn't falter. "And you believe regularity gives you the right to decide who is worthy of respect?" The silence turned electric. "I believe standards matter," Hammond stammered. "My wife teaches art to underprivileged children. She's helped trauma survivors find healing through clay. She gives her time, her heart, her talent. And you want to tell me she doesn't meet your standards because she's not wearing heels?" Across the room, forks paused midair. Even the kitchen doors had cracked open. "Mr. Parker," Elaine said, desperation creeping in. "We'd be honored to prepare your table now. Complimentary, of course." Michael's expression didn't change. "No, this isn't about a table anymore. It's about what you value." Thomas, the young host who had been ordered to escort Hannah out, stepped forward. "Sir," he said, voice trembling but steady. "She tried to tell us several times about the anniversary, about who she was, but no one listened. We just assumed." Michael turned to him, expression softening. "Thank you for your honesty." Victoria's mask crumbled further. "We had no way of knowing." "You had every way," Michael replied. "All you had to do was listen." A slow murmur swept through the dining room like wind through tall grass. Not outrage, recognition. From a corner table, an elderly woman stood. "My husband and I have dined here for 20 years, she said, voice like crystal. "We won't be returning. Character matters more than cashmere." Elaine's composure collapsed into desperation. "Please, Mr. Parker, let's make this right." He looked at her one last time. "You can't unring a bell, but maybe you can learn to listen for the right sounds next time." Then he turned to Hannah. "Shall we?" She nodded. Together, they stepped outside. The Porsche waited, its dark body catching the reflections of a restaurant change, not by force, but by truth plainly spoken. As the door closed behind them, the golden light faded, and inside the silence lingered, hollow where once there had been pride. A long silence hung in the Crystal Palace, heavier than any chandelier above. Michael's words had cut through the air like the quiet snap of a violin string, not loud, but undeniable. The kind of truth that doesn't shout, but reshapes the atmosphere. Hannah stood beside him, her hand gently resting on his arm, her composure like the stillness after a storm. She hadn't asked for the spotlight, hadn't demanded retribution. Yet somehow, her very presence now demanded a reckoning, not through fury, but through grace. From the shadows of the doorway, Thomas took a slow, uncertain step forward. His server's jacket still hung on his frame, but his face looked different, no longer a bystander. "Sir," he said quietly, then stronger. "Mrs." Parker tried to explain. She mentioned her husband several times, but no one listened. The room stirred. A few heads turned, some glances exchanged. Victoria's face drained of color as she shot Thomas a scalding look. But the young man held steady, his voice trembling but honest. She wasn't disturbing anyone. She was just kind, polite. She was ignored because of how she looked. Then, slowly, like an old tree bending to wind, an elderly couple rose from their table. The woman wore pearls, her silver hair coiled elegantly at the nape of her neck. Her husband stood tall, despite the cane he gripped. "We've been dining here for over 20 years, the woman said, her voice composed but cutting. But somewhere along the way, this place forgot the difference between exclusivity and exclusion. Her eyes met Hannah's. "My dear, your grace shames this entire room." The murmur that followed wasn't outrage. It was recognition. Another diner, a young woman in a tailored suit, stood. "This isn't the Crystal Palace I remember." Then a man in a Boston Bruins cap. What she said was wrong. That's not how you treat people. One by one, voices began to rise, not in anger but in clarity. A collective unlearning was unfolding in real time. Thomas stepped forward again, quietly unbuttoning his jacket. "I can't be part of this anymore." He folded it neatly and placed it on the hostess podium. "I've watched people like Mrs. Parker turn away too many times." Elaine, now pale and visibly shaken, opened her mouth, but no sound came. Michael looked around the room, not triumphant, just resolute. "This was never about a table," he said softly. "It's about how we see people, and how easily we decide who's worthy, not by character, but by clothing, by silence." He turned to Hannah. "Let's go." But before they could reach the door, the elderly man, the one with the cane, raised his hand. "Mr. Parker," he said, voice gravelly but firm, "thank you for reminding us. We needed it." As they exited, a soft, spontaneous applause followed them. Not loud or dramatic, just enough to feel like something had shifted, something real. 3 weeks later, the air in Boston had softened, touched by the first hints of spring. The streets still glistened from a light afternoon rain, but the evening was warm, not in temperature but in spirit. In a quiet neighborhood far from the chandeliers and cold polish of the Crystal Palace, Hannah and Michael stood outside a modest brick building. Above them, a hand-painted sign read, "Common Ground Kitchen, come as you are." Inside, mismatched wooden tables filled the warmly lit space, set with fresh flowers and mismatched mugs. Laughter rolled from corner to corner. Music played softly from a speaker in the back, and the smell of garlic and fresh bread made everything feel like home. "Are you sure about this?" Michael asked, though he already knew the answer. Hannah smiled, slipping her arm through his. "This place feeds more than appetites." They stepped inside, immediately greeted with smiles. Not because someone recognized them, but because that's just what this place did. No one looked twice at Michael's untucked shirt or Hannah's cardigan, smudged with a hint of clay from her afternoon class. A familiar face appeared behind the counter, his eyes lighting up. Thomas. Gone was the nervous posture of a server avoiding reprimand. He now moved with the purpose of someone who had found his place. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker," he beamed. "You came?" They nodded, embracing him like an old friend. "Thanks to the grant," Thomas said, "we've launched free cooking classes for kids and job training dinners for folks re-entering the workforce. The community's showing up. It's real." He led them to a long table near the window, where families, students, and retirees dined together, stories crossing generations and incomes with ease. As the evening unfolded, Hannah and Michael ate simply, a handmade ravioli, local greens, strawberry tart. Yet each bite tasted like a celebration of shared humanity. Across from them sat an elderly woman with hands weathered from years of work. She told them about her garden. A little boy at the next table giggled with his brother over a spilled cup of juice. No one minded. The moment was perfect in its imperfections. Michael watched Hannah, her eyes bright beneath the soft glow of string lights. "You always find the places that matter," he said quietly. "It's never about the place," she answered. "It's about the people who believe everyone deserves to be seen." Later, As they prepared to leave, Thomas handed them a small envelope. Inside was a thank you card hand-drawn by one of the children in the program, a crayon sketch of a kitchen with people smiling at a long table. Above it, the words, "Thank you for helping us feel welcome." Hannah pressed the card to her heart. "This," she whispered, "this is the real anniversary gift." As they stepped out into the cool evening, stars blinking above the rooftops, Michael turned to her. "We could have eaten anywhere tonight. 5 stars, wine pairings, white tablecloths. But tonight," Hannah said, "we ate with purpose." They reached the car, not the Porsche this time, but an old hybrid hatchback they rarely used. It didn't matter. Tonight, there was no stage to arrive on, no mask to wear. They drove in silence for a while, hand in hand. At a red light, Michael looked over and said, "Do you regret what happened at the Crystal Palace?" She shook her head gently. "No, because sometimes it takes the wrong room to find the right one." He smiled, and as the light turned green and the city opened before them like a blank canvas, one truth echoed between them, carried on the rhythm of their shared journey. Real worth isn't worn, it's lived. Have you ever been judged before being known? In a world obsessed with appearances. Stories like Hannah's remind us that dignity doesn't wear a dress code, and worth isn't reserved for the wealthy. It's in how we treat others when no one's watching. It's in the quiet choices. The voice that speaks up, the hand that reaches out, the heart that doesn't flinch in the face of unfairness. This isn't just one of many emotional stories. It's a reminder that in every room, there's a person like Hannah, underestimated, unseen, quietly strong. And perhaps there's a Thomas inside each of us too, waiting for the courage to stand tall. At its core, this tale is part of a bigger thread, a series of narrated stories, touching stories, and incredible stories that spark waves of justice and shift how we see the world. If this Unraveled Fates moment stirred something in you, share it, talk about it. Be the one who sees worth beyond the surface. Because sometimes the simplest story leaves the deepest mark. And if you're still reading, we have more stories like this. Don't just scroll. Subscribe, reflect, and be part of something meaningful.